There you go. Okay.
And we should be recording. Very good.
Yes.
Well, hello, everyone. Steve Farrar here, your host. It's going. As soon as she hits record, I can't adjust. Lisa, the functionality is not there. Sorry about that, guys. I can't advance. Oh, use this.
I did.
Awesome. Oh, there we go. Here's where we. Once you free it up, it's fine. Getting to know you. Yeah, we'll have it by the last show. We'll have it down pat. All right, so today we're going to Glacier. We'll start up in the Canadian border in Montana, 2 in Wyoming, and we'll end up with 3 of the 4 Colorado parks. I put Mesa Verdi over in the Colorado Plateau grouping because the others are more in the mountains. So without further ado, let's just get started because we can easily spend a lot of time. Glacier, this was a few years ago on the sign. That's me sitting in the entrance sign. So we're up on the Canadian border, top of Montana. Montana's a big state. It's way up at the top. It was one of the early parks, 1910. And actually it was, well, you can see the dotted line there. There's only one single road that goes from east to west across the park. You'll see why when we start looking at some of the scenery, but it is bisected north to south by the Continental Divide, which is pretty interesting because what that means is any snow melt or rainfall to the east of that line ends up trickling its way down to either the Missouri or the Mississippi and flows down to the Gulf of Mexico and empties into the Atlantic Ocean, whereas anything that happens to fall just to the left of that dotted line is on the western side, and that'll funnel down mainly into the Colorado River, down through Utah and Arizona, and empty out into the Gulf of California. So it goes to the Pacific. Waterton up above the border back in the 30s, this was the first in the world international park where they glommed on an adjacent conservation land to the border of Glacier. So we had an international peace park. There's our symbol for Glacier. The mountain goats love the place, and there are many. We'll get into wildlife in a minute, but that's the symbol of the park. So Glacier is pretty wild. It's the Canadian Rockies are the younger Rockies, younger than the Americans, and this is very close to them. So eroded peaks that are yet to be eroded into smoothness. 10,000 feet. They're not the tallest mountains in Colorado, but so you have 25 glaciers to pick from. In my opinion, if you want to go to Glacier and see glaciers, you got about 4 years left and they're going to be gone. 1850 wasn't all that long ago. There were over 150 glaciers. There's now 25, and this is what they're doing. That was over 1,000 feet thick. The glacier in 1913, the patch on the right is what's left 100 years later. So it's not retreating, they're disappearing. So hiking, because of the lack of roads, hiking is the main way to see the park. There are 700 miles of hiking trails, so there you have options. There's lots of different ways to hike. Nice cleared trails. You have to remember one thing, however. You're in the wildlife. This is wilderness area. The rangers will tell you to make noise. I don't sing particularly well. I choose to put bells on my hiking staff just to give a little notice. bears don't normally look for conflict. They're not going to attack for sport. The issue comes if you're quiet and you're coming along and all of a sudden mama bear's over on the right and the kid on the left and you're in between them. Oops. If they know you're coming, they may step off to the side. They may be 5 feet away in the bushes and you don't even know the proximity. You'll walk right by. But if they don't know you're there, that's the problem. So a little noise is a good thing. And by the way, if you happen to be staring at your feet for your foot placement so you don't sprain an ankle, that's fine. But when these people look up, the bears aren't stupid. If you make a nice clear path for them, they're not going to go off and rumble through the underbrush to get from point A to point B. They're going to use the path. So you really should, if you're in the wilderness, you should look up once in a while. They're about to get a very big they're going to get a who has the right of way, the bigger ones. U-shaped valleys are indicative of glacial activity. When the last ice age, when the big 4,000 foot thick, very heavy sheets of ice retreated back up into Canada, they carved out these valleys. If you see U-shaped valleys like this, it's a glacier that did it. If it was a river that caused, it's a much sharper, it's a V. The river makes for steeper sides. There are U-shaped valleys, which basically gouged out potholes on the retreat over the ensuing years, either through snow melt or rainwater. These potholes have filled. There are over 250 lakes, not in Montana, within the borders of Glacier National Park. There's 250 different lakes, and they're all exquisite. So it's well worth hiking. Very, very big difference as to what time of year you go. And this is true with any of the parks. You go to one place, Lake McDonald happens to be the biggest lake in the park. The Going to the Sun Road drives along the length of it, so you can pull over here. Obviously, it's fall, comparable parallel to New England in terms of climate. There's deciduous trees that they have their foliage, it turns, this is the fall. You can come back to this same place in the winter and it's still gorgeous, it's still spectacular, but it's blues and whites, it's winter decor. So it's still pretty, it's just a very different scene than what you would see at a different time of year. So there's your Going to the Sun Road in Lake McDonald. The dotted line there that climbs up the rib to the circle, Lincoln Lake, is a great hike. It's lengthy, it's 8 miles in one direction. And this is a whole ridge along here. Once you're up there, it's fine, but coming up from Lake McDonald, the first 1.5 miles, you climb over 2,000 feet vertical. So it's rather strenuous. But the payoff is when you're up at Lincoln Lake, you see the Chief Falls coming down from above that fills the lake, which is like down a sheer face. And if you keep climbing, you keep going up, you get to look down at Lincoln Lake and the falls to the left, go up higher, and you really get a view. This is an extended trip, but now you can see Lake Ellen Wilson up above, where the water that's feeding the waterfall that's filling Lincoln Lake down below. So you get a twofer. And the beauty is there's not a chance you can take a bad picture. Any shot you take is postcard material once you're up in that strata. If you're hiking in the summer, it gets very dry, it's very hot, and you can't wait to get to those nice, cooling, refreshing lakes. It takes about less than 30 seconds immersion for your muscles to completely cramp up. That water is so cold. Well, there's floating ice in it. It's literally melting ice, and it looks refreshing. But if you're hot and your muscles are all warmed up, boy, they cool down in a hurry. Wherever you have mountains and melt water, you're going to have cascading waterfalls. You can hear, it's wonderful. As you're hiking, you can hear the waters all around you. And the the meadows and stuff that you can hike up to. You go a couple hundred miles up on any of the trails and you're pretty much going to have the place to yourself. It is popular. There are lots of people that want to go see Glacier, but there are so many miles of trails. You're pretty much going to have these areas to yourself. You don't have to hike. They do have trail rides you can go on, either day trips or there's multi-day trips. If you go out, if you want to stay in the saddle for a while, you can go out and there's some chalets that are way out in the middle of nowhere. 8 miles out down a trail is Sperry Chalet. This place is awesome. Hard to get to, but when you're there, they can sleep up to 152 people a night. They could. And that's an adventure when you get that many outdoors people sitting around a campfire, telling stories and stuff. It's a very memorable experience. However, a spraying fire. We will get to, when we go to Rocky Mountains in a few minutes, I'll go into more detail about why the fires are so out of control. The Sprague fire in 2017 burned over 17,000 acres in the park, including the old chalet. It was so popular, the Park Service was able to raise over $12 million. It's not very easy to build when it's 8 miles up a strenuous trail to get there. They had to ferry in supplies with helicopters and stuff to rebuild it, but they got it all rebuilt in time for the 2020 camp season. And then the whole park was shut down from COVID. So it didn't open then, but it is now about $237 a head for a bunk in the place. It's not the only place. This is another one, Granite Park Chalet. Highline's a strenuous trail. That's a haul, but your reward after 7.5 miles if you've got reservations there. And I say if because this doesn't sleep quite as many as Sperry did. It can sleep dozens and dozens of people, however. Every night from late May to the end of September, you have X number of people that can stay there. As soon as that reservation system opens in February to pick a date when you want to be there, within 10 to 15 minutes, every single slot has been taken. So the wonders of today's internet and media access, there's upsides and downsides. You got to know way in advance that you want to stay there. But if you do hit the lottery and you get a spot, how'd you like to come out at the end of the day sitting on the porch and have that for your appetizer scenery in front of you? Spectacular park. You don't have to rough it. When the Great Northern Railway built the cross-country rail connecting a bunch of the old parks, they went to great expense to induce the Easterners with their monies to come visit. See America was the poster in the 30s and 40s, See America. They actually were granted when you have 200-foot lodgepole pines, you can build structures like this. They're absolutely phenomenal. So that was to attract the Easterners to come, that they had these great lodges, which would be a hell of a bucket list now to go. This is the second one, Many Glaciers, is inside the park. This one, Glacier Park Lodge, is in East Glacier. It's just outside the park. This is right on Swift Current Lake. It was also built by the Great Northern Railway. Look at the reception area. I mean, those holes holding things up go up 4 stories. It's not exactly a Motel 6 is the point. Nothing against Motel 6. In order to have the lumber to do this, they got special dispensation, the railroad did, by Stephen Mather to build a sawmill so that they could use some of the old growth wood to build these lodges. After the lodges were built, they were finding that this was very lucrative, and they kept cranking out board feet of wood. And Mather was livid. He had told them to cease and desist and shut down. They ignored him. He physically went and burned down the sawmill because they wouldn't abide by his directive. He didn't want more of the forests being cut down, but those are made. There are other activities. The Flathead River is, it's not going to make you forget a trip through the Colorado, or through the Grand Canyon, but it gives the kids something to do other than hiking. So you can go on day trips, or you can do an overnight, which is fun because then you can camp out where there is no one else. The centerpiece, though, is the drive on Going to the Sun Road. This is a road where there doesn't deserve to be any road. There shouldn't be any road. It's only 50 miles, but if you can do it in less than 3 hours, you've wasted the trip, in my opinion. This was a make work project in the Civilian Conservation Corps back in the 30s. They said, okay, we want a road here. We want to get across this. Well, there's Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel hacking away. You had to put a road around a mountain where it's not like there's a flat spot that was obvious. You had to carve into the side of the mountain. So the mountain goes up on one side and down on the other. And it is a spectacular drive. If you are going, my very, very strong recommendation is one person drive in one direction and the other gets to sightsee, switch passengers, and the driver should not be sightseeing. You'll note the lack of guardrails on this road. Oh, to build? Good Lord, that's a good question. It started in the 30s. I had maybe 5 or 6 years. Question was, how long did the road take to build? I don't know, but it was a hell of an effort. You do go up and over the Continental Divide on the Traverse. There were parts where there was nothing to support the trail. So you have these arches that there was one strong section, so they built an arch to support the span. You don't see that when you're driving it. The best way to go, in my opinion, are these red jammers. They have bus tours that are awesome. It's basically a party bus. If you get a day like this, they roll off the top. You can poke up there and take all the pictures you want and leave the driving to them. Somebody emailed me a notice 2 weeks ago. One of these original 1930s red jammers sold for almost $600,000. One of the original buses from the place. So they're relics. They're pretty cool. They've been refurbished, but this is just on and on, more of the same as you go around the corners. It's just spectacular viewing. No shortage of wildlife in the park. The Bighorn sheep, I term them wildlife. There are no firearms allowed in any of the national parks. So after a couple generations, they're not used to catching one between the eyes. They're not used to getting shot at. So they lose their fear. They'll come over and see what you're doing and stuff. They're not all that wild. And it's not exceptional that you get a wildlife sighting, particularly with the bears. They have both brown bears and grizzlies in the park. To me, it's amazing we don't see more notices about bear maulings, because a lot of the visitors get caught up in their enthusiasm and they'll leave their cars to go out in the meadow to get an up close, a better picture. This is not a petting zoo. These are wild creatures, and you have to respect that and keep. That's what the nice long lenses are for on those cameras, so you don't have to physically go close to them. But it is not a rarity to catch sight of a bear. Yeah.
Can I ask you, in the summer, are the people driving over that Going to the Sun Road, is it Is there so much traffic that everybody's going?
No, there are turnouts. The question's about congestion on the going to the Sun Road.
But nobody's speeding around the,
Oh, no, nobody speeds.
but it's sort of almost bumper to bumper going up and.
I haven't been there in a while since that's why they're restricting the numbers of cars. You have to, if you are staying in the park at one of the hotels, I think you get an automatic pass to drive. But if you're not staying in the park, you have to make an advance reservation to be able to drive the going to the Sun Road. Bald eagles, there's quite a few nesting pairs in the area. Again, you stop trapping them or shooting at them and they like the area, they'll stay. Mountain goats are fantastic critters. They are vegetarians. They chomp away on the grass and stuff. So their diet is very deficient in minerals. One way they solve that, and these are they all can climb. They have cloven hooves, which allow them unique purchases on walls that you wouldn't think they could get up. What they're doing here is this is basically a Mother Nature made them a giant salt lick. They're up on the side of this to lick the minerals. There's salt, and they need that in their diet. So they come to this place. It's like a climbing wall, basically. But there's quite a few. There's over 1,500 of the goats in the park. So you're going to catch sight of them. This is a great park to spend some time in. Some parks you can blow into and spend an afternoon and say you've been there. This one you want to set aside time to sit out on your deck at many glaciers and look out over the lake at sunset. That's the first of our parks. Yellowstone. I laugh only because we have a finite amount of time to get through here, and Yellowstone is very big. And there's a lot to present about it. We could easily eat up the rest of our time here talking about Yellowstone. Yellowstone's the only national park that flows over into 3 states. There's a portion of it in Idaho. It does go up over the line into Montana, but the bulk of the park is in the northwest corner of Wyoming. It is the first private land that was set aside for public use to use the term national park. So it was our first national park. Yosemite is actually the first parcel of land that was set aside for the public use. But this was the term national park came into being with Yellowstone. The white lines are the roads. So there's a north entrance, a northeast entrance, a southern entrance, western entrance. It's basically a figure 8 to drive around through. Yellowstone is 3 parks in one when you go there. It's absolutely huge. It's 2.2 million acres. Second largest in the lower 48. Any guess as to who's the biggest in the lower 48? That would be Death Valley. Death Valley is over 3 million acres. It's huge. But it's out in the desert and nobody goes there. This is being the first, you get to make the mistakes and they get later corrected. So people would see pictures of bears in Yellowstone. And when they come to visit, they want to get a picture of a bear. So the rangers would arrange early on to throw meat outside the lodges where people were to attract bears. And bears aren't stupid. Why should I go chase the pronghorn that I can't catch when I know if I show up at 4 o'clock, there's going to be meat out there for us. So every day at 4, the bears would show up and people would get their pictures. They don't do that anymore. The wolves were creating havoc. They were killing the elk. They were eating the buffalo. The rangers trapped and shot and eradicated all of the wolves. There were no wolves left in Yellowstone. They were gone. They've since been reintroduced. They used to pump the hot water so that the people in these lodges would have hot showers. They'd take the hot water right out of the geothermal features for hot water. Well, that screws up nature. The catch basins that made for the geysers and stuff, you don't tamper with it. Leave the plumbing alone. So they don't do that anymore. And of course, they used to, as soon as there was a lightning strike that started a fire, they'd quickly put it out. And that inhibited the tinder, the underbrush, from being eradicated, and it would build up, and now you have out of control wildfires. So now they let the naturally caused fires burn. So anyway, it's a learning ground. This is actually a picture of what used to be a lodge. The lodge burned down, and instead of rebuilding, they removed all the asphalt parking area. They removed every trace of it. I'll show you a similar slide later on. There's less land developed today in the park than there was 50 years ago. They're returning more of the park to natural. Now, the scenes that you see in Yellowstone are spectacular. They would clearly stand on their own. In my opinion, you gain more appreciation if you do a little homework in advance. If you study the geology of what makes this area, I don't know, maybe when you see what you're going to learn, you'd be better off not knowing it. The caldera, the red line there, which makes up the lion's share of the park. If you're in Yellowstone, you're standing inside of the largest supervolcano on the face of the earth. If you go out to Kilauea, that's been flowing. It's a shield volcano. It doesn't blow its top. It's been flowing for the last 30 years. That crater, Kilauea crater, is 2.5 miles across. If you go over to Oregon, Mount Mazama that we covered before when it imploded, that's a 6-mile caldera. Yellowstone, about 45 miles across. That's how big the caldera is. If you drilled underneath where we're sitting here, you would have to go down about 15 miles is the average thickness of the crust before you would get to liquid lava, down to where there's a mantle. That's the average. In Yellowstone, it's less than 2 miles. So it doesn't take much cracking of the crust to make some vents where the groundwater can seep down, hit the hot spot, evaporate, turn into steam, and come back up as a geyser. It's very close. They knew the magma chamber was close. Using today's technology, they've been able to look down and see what's underneath. They've discovered, anybody here been to the Grand Canyon? That's a very large hole in the ground. The newly discovered reservoir of magma underneath the one that they knew about holds enough liquid rock, molten rock, to fill the Grand Canyon 11 times. If this baby goes, we don't have anything to worry about, because life as we know it is gone. If it erupted, which I'll give you evidence that it's about to, or it's going to, it's not anytime soon. You got another 60, 70,000 years before it goes. But the eruption would be roughly 2,000 times the size of Mount St. Helens. So it's going to blot out the sun. It's going to be a bad thing. When I say there's evidence, Yellowstone Lake, which is at 7,000 feet elevation, it's the highest lake in North America, is leaking. The lake, the southern shores, the fingers there are pouring out water, and the shoreline on the north is rising noticeably, measurably. An inch a year, it's not. What that tells the geologists, though, is that the bubble underneath is rising. This is in the middle of the caldera. The magma's on the move. It's rising, and it's going to go. It goes roughly every 700,000 years. Yellowstone's, this would be the fourth time it blows. It's been 630,000 since the last one. So we got another 60,000 years or so that you can go visit and feel safe. Just a quick note about John Colter. You may have heard Yellowstone referred to as Colter's Hell. John Colter was the lead guide on the Lewis and Clark expedition. He's a mountain man. He was out there, and when they started heading back to go back to St. Louis, he said, "Nah, not me. I don't think so." So he jumped ship up in Montana and set up a fort up there where there was some trappers that were having issues with the Indians in the area who didn't want their critters being taken. That was their food. So they sent John out there to parley with them and make peace. Well, he was the first white man that went down into Jackson Hole area on this mission. And on the way back up to Montana, he went through the thermal area of Yellowstone, came back with these wild stories of bubbling water coming right out of the ground and everything. And everybody thought he was nuts, that he was been out in the snow a little too long. Turned out to be very true, but it wasn't proven right away. The thermal features is the first area of the park that we'll talk about. There are other places around the globe where you can go to Iceland and see geysers and thermal features. You can go to New Zealand, has a few. Of all the geothermal features all around the world, more than half of them are inside the borders of Yellowstone Park. There's over 10,000 different features. 5 major types. The one you're looking at is a hot spring. Most people think it's minerals that are causing the coloration. They're not. They're thermophiles, extremophiles actually, because they can resist the scalding temperatures. Each of the different colors is a different type, a different species of these algae. So it's who's growing that determines the color. It is a national park. You're free to go wherever you want. My, again, very strong recommendation would be stay on the boardwalks. You can't tell how, whoops, sorry. Hit the wrong button. You can't tell how thick or conversely how thin the crust is around these pools, and you don't want to plunge your leg through into boiling water. So look at the boardwalks. To give you a size of Grand Prismatic, the largest one, it's bigger than a football field across. You can see the people on the boardwalk to give it some scale. That's a giant hot spring. The second type of feature is travertine terraces. Travertine is chemically not far from limestone. It's very similar. So over the eons, as it melts and drips down, the formations are not unlike what you would get in a stalactites and stalagmites in a cave, but here it's a table setting. So it looks sculpted, but Mother Nature is the one that piled up the deposits. This is in the northwest section, just below the north entrance to the park, Mammoth Hot Springs. Mud pots are unique. They're kind of fun to watch. They sit there and they bubble up, and they're fine until the bubble breaks. It's straight sulfur gas, and if you know what rotten eggs smell like, it's very, very strong. So if you're close enough to get images like this, you're gonna come away with your clothes smelling of sulfur. But they just sit there and bubble away. Kind of fun to watch. Steam vents don't have a catch basin area that builds up any kind of pressure. They're just a crack where groundwater finds its way down, hits hot down below, and comes back up as steam. More of a constant supply. The black growler here, it's just a constant flow of steam, which the bison love in the wintertime because it keeps the area warm. It lets them get to the grass and gives them something to eat over the winter months. But there's sections of, this is Roaring Mountain. It's not a geyser that goes up once in a while. Any time of day or night you drive by there, there's steam just shooting up out of the vents all over the sides of this mountain. So it's hence the name. And then we have geysers. Geysers, fewer than 1,000 in the world. Again, more than half of them here at Yellowstone. Castle Geyser, Beehive goes up pretty high. It's right near one of the lodges. Steamboat's the big one. It's actually the tallest geyser anywhere in the world. It goes up almost 400 feet when it goes. That's the thing with this one. 2018, we set a new world record for Steamboat geyser. 32 times it erupted. That was quickly shattered in 2019 when it went up 45 times. The 4 years previous, it didn't go at all. In the 60s, it averaged 20 times a year erupting. Then for 50 years, not a peep, it went dormant. There's a lot of not Richter scale type earthquakes, but there's mini quakes in Yellowstone. It's an active volcanic area. If there's a catch in where the collection pressure builds up and then an earthquake opens an avenue like a release vent, boom, there's not enough pressure to build up so it doesn't go. It keeps changing. Right now, if 45 in 2019, it's closed off and now it's erupting, but it's not very reliable. That brings us to our very reliable Old Faithful. This one, see the lodge next to it. If you're over there buying your t-shirts and stuff, they have literally a digital clock with a countdown telling you when it's going to go. It's like every 67 minutes or 72 minutes or something like that. But so that you not miss it, they have a countdown so that you'll go come outside. And there is a stand area. You'll be 20 deep if you go there in the peak visitation periods of the summer. Again, my advice, how many times are you going to be at Yellowstone? I set my alarm for 4 in the morning, got up. It doesn't shut off just because the alarm clock hasn't gone off. It goes every 67 minutes. So I had a front row seat. There were 2 marmots that came out to see if I had brought them any breakfast stuffs. So my 2 marmots and I had a front row seat. I had a personal blow up of Old Faithful. If you wait till 7:30 or 8:30, the tour buses are going to show up and you'll be 20 deep to crane your neck and get a picture. Take a nap later. Get up when the hordes aren't there. Remember the good old days when you had to mail your film off to get developed, and then you'd get the pictures back and they had the date and the year on it. This is June 1969. I was a 14-year-old Eagle Scout on my way to the National Boy Scout Jamboree up in Idaho, and they flew us into Salt Lake City, and we had a road trip up through there. And this is our Boy Scouts running off to see Old Faithful go up. This is a fun hike. It's a mile to get out there. It's the only park and place in the entire Yellowstone where you're allowed to soak in the waters. The river is cold. That's ice water. But they've built a little divider that diverts some of the cold water. The water coming down off the hillside is boiling water. That's hot water. So they mix. And it's like playing Goldilocks. You keep hopping in the different lengths of the pool until you hit just the right temperature that satisfies what you like, and you can sozzle there for a while. It's a unique experience. So the thermal area is one section of the park. The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone could be its own park. It's 24 miles long. Absolutely spectacular. This is the lower falls. It doesn't have the flow of water that Niagara has, although it is the highest volume waterfall in the Rockies, but it's 300 feet instead of 160 feet, the Niagara, so it's twice as tall. Beautiful vantage points throughout. This is one that you'll have company at. It's called Artist Point. People come here and set up their tripods and stuff, but there's a head of a trail there that you can hike all the way down to the bottom and get very desirable images looking up the canyon. And it's not the only waterfall in the park. There's almost 300 of them. The river itself, this surprised me. I thought the Mississippi was the longest, or the Missouri, but apparently the Yellowstone River is the longest free-flowing river in the lower 48. There, at no point is it dammed up. So for over 600 miles, it's just open water flowing. This is that same image that I showed you before that is less developed than it was 50 years ago. Now we're heading up over to the northeast corner, the third park in one, the Lamar Valley. Known as the American Serengeti, this is where the critters are. The elk herds are there, the bison are there, they're all lots of food, so they come to graze. The little river otters are there. Pronghorn are very unique. They're ungulates. Ungulates have the cloven hooves like the Bighorn sheep have, the mountain goats. Deer, moose, elk, bison. Pronghorn are actually the fastest land animal in North America. I would argue in the world. The cheetah has been recorded as faster, but it's short sprints. Pronghorn can beat a cheetah if you lengthen the length of the race. They can maintain fast speeds for longer distances. So my vote goes to the pronghorn. But where you have food, that's where the predators show up. So you've got wolverines and wolves and bears and mountain lions, and very, very great viewing. So they'll come get their elk steak for dinner, or their bison burger, or whatever's on the menu. It's actually the only place where, because the wolves have been reintroduced, they reintroduced in the 90s 15 gray wolves out of Canada, and now there's like 7 different packs in Yellowstone. So as long as they don't go outside the borders, they're safe. Problem is there's no fencing around the Yellowstone border, so if the wolves choose to go off, and the ranchers have sheep and cattle in Wyoming, and if the wolves go after them, they're fair game, they can be shot. So the wolves got to learn in a hurry that where the borders are. Very, very different depending on if you go there in the winter. They get between 12 and 24 feet of snow on average in Yellowstone. So you can get spectacular pictures. They're all just as beautiful. They're just very different from the July pictures, images. They do leave some of the roads open for snowmobiling in the winter, but the buffalo have the right of way. If they're on the path, you pull over and let them go. And again, the thermal features don't end just because you happen to have turned a page on the calendar. They still bubble over. It's just now you got to use snowshoes or cross-country skis to get out to them. You get very still beautiful, but very different images of the place. So that's our visit to Yellowstone. Rockefeller Parkway. We owe an awful lot to the Rockefellers. Steve Mather took John Jr. down from a visit to Yellowstone to see the Tetons, which had yet to be made a national park. With Rockefeller's help, the Grand Teton National Park was formed. So now you had Yellowstone and the Tetons. There's only 27 miles in between them. And once you had 2 parks, it wasn't quite as commercialized as Niagara Falls, but immediately fences started going up and ranches were being built. along the corridor. Rockefeller set up an alias company, so nobody knew it was him doing it, but he bought up every parcel of land in between the two parks and then just gave it to the government to keep it from being commercialized, which is why it's named in his honor, Rockefeller Memorial Parkway. So you go down south out of Yellowstone and you hit the Tetons. The fur trapper's term for a valley is a hole. So this is Jackson Hole, the valley. And what makes this so spectacular is that it's a fault system where the valley dropped while the mountains were being thrust up. And it doesn't ease you into it. There's no front range that step you up to it. You just have a 7,000 mile differential, 7,000 foot elevation differential between the valley and the top of the Grand. So it's pretty spectacular. I won't go into all the geology. It used to be a 4-mile differential, but that was 13 million years ago. So the great equalizer is erosion. The mountains are still going up, but they're not going up as fast as they're being eroded down. So now there's a 1-mile differential between the valley and the mountains. The Teton, 7,000 feet above the valley. And if that's from the east, if you go on the backside, on the west side, there is a front range, and it's nowhere near as striking a height differential. So there's an aerial view. Off to the left over there would be Jackson Hole. There's the parkway that goes up to Yellowstone to the right. This is Jenny Lake. That's your access point to the opening there that takes you into the backcountry. Jenny Lake is just a magnificent hike around. You do have to remember that you're still in the wilderness. There are critters out there. Signal Mountain, you can drive up. It's quite a series of, you can't drive more than 5 miles an hour. It's a series of continuous switchbacks to get up to the top. But the view from up there, you have the whole Snake River plateau down below you, and you didn't even have to hike to get up to it. You get an amazing view, and this is out of your car. I put this in for a funny story because when we were going through the Northwest, I think I told you the story that I met my wife in California. She grew up here in Barnstable. I grew up outside of Boston. We met in California. We were going to move east, and neither one of us had been through the Northwest before. So we went north from San Francisco in a van, which you spend 7 weeks in a van with somebody, you get to know them. 7 weeks, one singular argument in 7 weeks, right here. We had an extra day. We had a wonderful weather for us. It was a horrible summer for the places we were driving through because it was such a drought, but we never had to delay any of our planned events because there were no rain days. It was just beautiful all day, every day. So we're sitting here with a day that we could choose what we wanted to do. And my vote was for whitewater raft trip down the Snake River. What the hell, we're there. Well, Daffy had, since she was a little girl, envisioned going to a dude ranch in Wyoming. If you go to Wyoming, that's cowboy country. You should be on a horse. No, I want to go on whitewater rafting. Well, here we are on our trail ride. So you see, 37 years later, we're still happily together. So I've learned the art of compromise. It's not a bad, I mean, look at the scenery. You're walking on your horse. I grew up with horses, so it wasn't a big deal. I knew they weren't going to let us go off cantering across the fields and stuff. So I didn't think it would be all that big a deal, but it was a fun afternoon around Jenny Lake. You don't have to go around it. You can cheat. You can get on the boat and they take you across over to the other area. So you can hike half of it if you want. Elk. largest elk herd anywhere on earth. There's over 14,000 head of elk, which if you go in the summer, you're not really going to have an appreciation for because they scatter. They go up into the high alpine meadows, and that's where their grass and food is and everything. But when the snow flies, down they come, to the point where the government has set aside a conserved area right across from Jackson Hole ski area, as you can see, the Elk Refuge. This allows the government to help out. They can bring bales of hay on snowmobiles out there and help the elk get through the winter. Well, elk shed their antlers. Every spring, their antlers fall off. So if you go to Jackson Hole, there's a lot of antlers. This is the town green in Jackson. Each of the cardinal points at the northeast, south, and west entrance to the green, there's one. They got to find something to do with all these antlers. So there's 10,000 pounds of antlers in each of the arches. And that's my wife in the middle. So every year, there's enough. So if there's 14,000 elk, maybe half of them are males, 7,000 sets of antlers out there in the refuge. One organization is allowed to go into the elk refuge and collect the antlers. Any guess as to who?
Boy Scouts.
The Boy Scouts. Give her a Cupid doll. Jackson Hole Boy Scout troop, he says enviously, has the best gear that you can imagine. This is their once a year fundraiser. They collect all the antlers and then they sell them to the artists that make the great big chandeliers for the log cabin $1 million houses, or make cribbage boards out of them, or whatever you do with antlers and stuff. They collect them and sell them. So they have some nice gear that the Boy Scouts aren't wanting for much. This happens to be a fall picture. A tennis buddy of mine, his son went out there on a visit, texted his dad, "Dad, sell my car, send me the money. I'm not coming home." He's, to this day, he's still there. He's a rafting guide on the Snake River. And he met a girl from Weston who was at the Four Seasons or something. They got married. This is looking through the arch at their wedding out obviously in the fall. Those are the aspen trees. I'd like to have that for the backdrop for your wedding pictures. Just, it doesn't really matter what time of year you go there. The viewing is spectacular. Ansel Adams has some just incredible black and white pictures that he's taken of the Grand. So now we're heading over to Colorado in our trip through the Mount Rockies. Black Canyon actually could go into the Colorado Plateau grouping, but here's the map of Colorado. If you're coming east to west, you can drive either Route 70 or Route 50 from Denver. There are exits on Route 50 for the canyon. Over half the national parks started out as national monuments, and then either through expansion or popularity, they get kicked upstairs. This was promoted from national monument status fairly recently, 1999, to a national park status. Well, I live in New Hampshire, so I put this in. Gunnison, that it's named after, was a New Hampshire guy. He was a West Pointer. He was a surveyor. They had the northern route. The railroads had the northern route and the southern route. His job was to find one in the middle, potential transcontinental railroad in the middle. Unfortunately, there was a group of white guys there before him who killed some of the Paiute Indians. He came along after them, was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Paiutes came back for vengeance. He hadn't done anything wrong, but they all look alike. So he and his group got wiped out. So that's Gunnison. The Gunnison River is named after him. It is absolutely amazing canyon. It's 1,100 feet from the north rim to the south rim. It's 2,700 feet from the rim to the river. So it's basically a slash. It's a very narrow canyon. There's 50 miles long, the canyon itself, but there's the National Recreation Area on one side and the National Conservation Area at the end. It's only the 12 miles in the national park that's actually the most spectacular. So if you come off of Route 50, here's your little scenic vista tour. There's viewing areas on the edges of the rim looking down, and there's Pulpit Rock is one of the stops on the tour. That's the view that you're looking down at the river. The rock itself is not black, but except the noontime when the sun is directly overhead and shining down into it, the canyon is always in shade. It's always dark. So that's why it's called the Black Canyon. It's because the light don't shine there very, very often. Normally you think canyon lands, you think wide open scenic vistas, you can see for 100 miles. This is the opposite of it. This is a canyon that's very steep. Blacks, grays, golds, browns, lots of different, and very, very hard rock. You wouldn't think that this river, the Gunnison, has enough power to carve that, but 95 feet per mile descent is about 10 times what the Colorado River drops going through the Grand Canyon. So it's not voluminous in terms of gallons of water per second that are going down it, but it's a fast flow. And this is what it's done. It's carved right down, very, very solid rock. It's not sedimentary, it's not shale, it's not going to come off in your hands. So if you happen to possess the skills that you can support your body weight from the last digit of your fingers, feel free. The rock's not going to fall off. You can climb. Most people take the trail. There isn't actually a trail from this point, the visitors center. There's 3 trails, the Gunnison, Tomichi, and Warner routes. And as I mentioned earlier, we were talking, they now limit the numbers of people that are allowed to go on the trail. We got there late in 2020. I brought my 3 boys here, and the 4 of us showed up. There were 13 of the 15 permits for backcountry had already been taken. So 2 of the boys looking down at what you would have to climb to get down there said, "Oh, gee, that's too bad that there weren't 4, so we can't go. We'll just take the level hike along the rim." Well, Brooks, the oldest one, is a CrossFitter, so he said, "We'll take them." So they grabbed the 2 permits. This is the trail that I went down, the Gunnison Trail from the Visitors Center. It's not very solid footing. It's crumbly. And the park the rangers will put 80-foot sections of chain wrapped around the base of a tree so that you can get back up, because otherwise it's just too steep. I went down there. I mean, literally, you can see it's kind of loose stuff. You're coming down out of the slot. There were 2 other guys there. The ranger that gave me the permit said, "Oh, you're going to have company down there." I said, "Why? How many?" This was mid-80s. I went down there. I was the 3rd permit of the day. There were 2 others, and me were the only 3 down there. The other 2 left their packs. They were fishermen. They were down fly fishing. I was there for 3 hours, never saw them. I sat out on the rocks in the middle of the river and just sunbathed and swam around and stuff. Brooks on the left is the one that said, "We'll take them." So Galen says, "Oh, great. He's got to go with them." So they went down. They were very happy to, it was 100 degrees. It was in July. They climbed down, made it to the bottom, got to cool off in the waters, but then you got to come back up. Coming up is not very easy. Even though there are helpful spots like that the chains are at that you can haul yourself back up. This is literally out the front of my tent. There's campgrounds right along the top of the rim, and the clouds gather there at night, and very special. Rocky Mountain National Park. You hit Denver, go up through Boulder. It's to the northwest of Denver. One of the most abrupt changes of scenery anywhere on the planet. If you're driving east, you go through Iowa and cornfields and Nebraska, and everything's flat and fields. Then all of a sudden, wham, we're not in Kansas anymore. The western edge of the Great Plains is about 7,000 feet elevation, and it goes to 14,000 footers. So the plains end. This was part of the Louisiana Purchase that glommed this onto us. Very similar to Glacier in that there's singular right to left, east to west traverse. There's one single road that goes through the park, and as well, the Continental Divide, north to south, bisects the park. But like Glacier, there's miles and miles of hiking trails, so you can enter from different points and then go off on your own. This is why there's not any roads in it. Estes Park is kind of the time-honored point of embarkation to visit the park. If you go up Trail Ridge, it climbs along one of these. That's the only road that goes through the park. There's just no way to build roads there. Don't skip Estes Park if you go there. This is a great place, like for a family reunion or something. It's kind of a western town. There's all kinds of shops and stuff to go shopping. You can take trail rides. You can do calm raft trips and stuff. Or there's higher adrenaline activities for those that wish that. Denver is the mile-high city. It's about 5,000 feet, 5,100 feet elevation. It's 3,000 feet higher in elevation as you drive up to Estes Park. Don't miss the Stanley Hotel. Stanley Hotel, Fred Stanley was a big proponent of the park. Like Rockefeller helped with getting some of the parks made. He was the strong backer of having the Rocky Mountain created so that it did not get commercialized or built up. He was the one that invented the Stanley steamer, the car, not the vacuum cleaner. Magnificent inn hotel that he built. It became a lot more famous when Stephen King spent the night there in the winter. This was what gave him the idea to write the book The Shining, was his term here. There's my wife's at the big hearth in the fall at Stanley Hotel. Long's Peak is a 14,000 footer, faces east. Obviously, this is sunrise. You know, you throw the numbers out there. We have New Englanders. We got our 4,000 footers. You know that everybody. Oh, I'm in the 4,000 foot club, and they're all proud of it. This is not in Colorado. This is just within the confines of Rocky Mountain National Park. There's 107 peaks that are over 11,000 feet. And 60 of those are over 12,000. So if you're going to go out to Colorado, don't make a big deal that you're in the 4,000 footer club. It's a different world out there. These little bastards, mountain pine beetles, not barely the size of a grain of rice. I don't like to talk about climate change. It gets a little bit too charged to bring up for a topic, but this is a perfect example of a very, very bad outcome of a very small blip in the temperature changes. These guys are not new. They've been here all along, but every winter they can't stand the cold. 98% of them every year get frozen to death. They die off. In the last 10, 15 years, just a degree or two less cold in the winter, warming, they don't die off. They've spread through the Canadian forests, the Washington state, Montana. They survive, they get under the bark and they attack the feeding system for the trees. And what happens is you have huge swaths of pine trees that may have green up at the top, but the lower where the capillary action brings nutrients up out of the roots, they're all disrupted. So you have dead needles and you have dead branches, and it's just a tinderbox. So when you do have a lightning strike, this was 2012, the Fern Lake fire, 3,500 acres inside the park burned to the ground because it's like a tinderbox. There's just, and it's the direct result of these damn little beetles. All right, so much for downers. If you drive the road, they call open fields parks. So you're looking down on the Horseshoe Park. This is where you'd see your elk and critters. You can actually park on the Trail Ridge Road at many parks curve. This is a sidewalk you can walk back to and look where you've come up at the scenery. You're climbing up to 12,000 foot elevation where winter comes early. This was October. Once the snows fly, they don't plow it. So the road's closed. You can't get across. They close the gate so that you don't drive all the way up and then find it impassable. This was October. It's already closed for the season. It's the highest continuous paved highway anywhere in the US, Route 34. Estes Park is at 8,100 feet. You go to 12,000 feet up at the visitor center there, the Alpine Visitor Center. So the climates that you're driving through in the matter of an hour, 2 hours, you start off not unlike New England. There's deciduous aspen trees, birch trees, lakes, conifers. You start driving up and the trees get shorter. You're coming up closer to the tree line. And then you go around a couple of corners and it's like you've been teleported up to the Alaskan tundra. It's bare. It's just totally different climate zone. There are a few turnoffs where you can park and hike out into the meadows. Again, no firearms allowed. So the wildlife really don't care that you're coming out into they're not used to being attacked. So you can get close, but they do provide awesome foreground to some pretty spectacular pictures. Mom and the kids are over there eating lunch and having a good time. They let the guys stand over there for the photo ops, provide the foreground. They're pretty special pictures. The Bighorn sheep, those you don't want to get too close to. Those aren't little lammies. They go about 300 pounds a piece. The horns themselves weigh about 80 pounds. So this is a visitor center that's up at the top. The logs are to keep the roof from blowing off. You're at 12,000 feet and the storms that rage up there will rip the shingles right off the top. So they put these things on to hold them on. I was up here. There's a little walkway from the parking lot that goes up to a sign that says 12,005 feet to officially prove that you were at 12,000 feet. I was having my lunch down in the parking lot and a bus pulled up. Please don't think less of me after this story. The bus pulls up and I'm looking and a couple of people came down off of the bus, fell right on their face, right onto the asphalt, face down. Next two people come down off the bus, same thing, bam. It's like there was a sniper picking them off. I had no idea what was going on. So I went over. The bus driver explained that it was a senior group from Atlanta. They had plane delays. They were way behind schedule. So the bus company was speeding things up to get back on schedule. They had flown from Atlanta in the morning to Denver at Mile High, got on the bus, drove up to Estes Park for lunch at 8,000 feet. And within a couple hours, they're up at 12. They went from sea level to 12,000 feet in the matter of a few hours. You can't do that. There's a lot less oxygen in the air at 12,000 feet. Then you got to give yourself, You don't plan to climb Long's Peak on day one of your visit to Rocky Mountain. You got to acclimatize. You got to get used to it. And once I learned that they were okay, that it was just oxygen, was kind of a funny scene, actually, watching them trying to negotiate their way into the gift shop. Anyway, if you go there, keep it in mind. You're 12,000 feet is nothing to sneeze at. So if you go up and over the Continental Divide and down the west side of the Rockies, this is where the Colorado starts. When it's just little, you can take a raft trip where you got to paddle to get somewhere. There's not much in terms of water volume. The western entrance, Mount Craig. These are the Never Summer Mountains on the western side. That's Rocky Mountain. And for our last Rocky Mountain Park, we're going to drop south to the Great Sand Dunes. Another one that was a national monument. This was just made a national park in 2004. It looks like it's due south of Denver. Don't take 25 to get there. You got to go out 70 and come way down around from the west to get to it, because in between the interstate and the dunes, there's the 14,000-foot Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and there's no road traversing them. They don't look like much from the satellite view, but the jet stream comes from the west, comes across the high Ponderosa central plains of Colorado. It picks up the grit and the sand particles as it's coming across. Then it slams into these 14,000-foot mountains, and to get up and over, it dumps the sand. So there's an accumulation there at the base of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Those are not potted plants. Those are 40-foot high cottonwoods. Those are 600-foot sand dunes. They're the tallest sand dunes in North America. And they're loose sand. There's no vegetation that's holding them. To climb the sand dunes, you may have been to Cape Cod National Seashore or something, go up the sand dunes. You put your foot up, as soon as you put weight on it, you lose 2/3 of the vertical that you go climb. So it's quite a hammy workout to climb up there. But people in the middle of the country can have a day at the beach. Dump the kids down at Madonna Creek, is about 6 inches deep down below. They can play around while you go off and climb the sand dunes. They now have rental places right outside the entrance to the park where you can grab sandboards. Everybody goes there to slide down the sand dunes. I went there in the 90s. They didn't have those. I borrowed a kid's empty refrigerator box and carried it up with me and got inside and slid down in the cardboard. They've gotten a lot more sophisticated now. You can boot in. You can actually bring your snowboards. I mean, it's like skiing on the same as snow if you want to. Pretty fun. No chairlifts though. You gotta hike up to get up to the top. If you slide down on anything, it's pretty fun. You don't have to slide down. There are other things to do. If you're going to hike out into the dunes, I would very strongly recommend baggies, sealable baggies the sand gets into everything. It just blows around your cameras or your cell phones or anything. They have outdoor showers at the visitor center, so you can get it off of you before getting back in your car, but sand goes everywhere. There's acres and acres of sand dunes. This is going up the big one. Star Dune is the tallest. It's 750 feet to get up to the top of this one. You can camp out there. You can go out there. You got to be self-reliant. There's no kinds of services or anything. But there is a campground closer to the visitor center. I took this out the front of my tent. It takes good clouds to make a good sunset shot, and the clouds every evening gather before they go up and over the mountains. They'll gather there, so you're almost guaranteed of spectacular sunset shots every night. That's our That's our Rocky Mountain Parks. Thank you. Thank you for coming. We're going to be back in 2 weeks, April 3rd. I think it's the 3rd, the second. 7 of the national parks are on islands. Normally you think in terms of visiting a national park, you get your RV and you go on a tour. Not these. We'll go from a couple in the Atlantic, in the middle of the country, and over in the Pacific. We'll visit all the island parks. That's our next one.
Is that all in Hawaii or?
2 of them are in Hawaii volcanoes and Haleakala. In between Fiji and Tahiti, there's a US national park, American Samoa.
When were you in Estes Park last? When was that picture of your wife taken?
Estes Park 5 years ago, I think. We had a wedding in Aspen that gave us a reason to go there. Oh, through the park.
All of Estes Park.
The comment is Estes Park is not a quaint little village anymore. It's gotten overcrowded. They had an awesome brewery, a little microbrewery that had just opened when I was there. And the guy was awesome. He found out they had actually closed. I said, oh, I just flew into Denver, drove up there. I'm starving. He had closed the kitchen. He says, well, where did you come from? I said, Boston. The guy had a Jones for Boston. He's never gotten there. He always wanted to. He opened the kitchen, gave me food and stuff, would not allow me to pay anything just because I happen to be from Boston. So I have very fond memories of the brewery in Estes Park. Did you happen to bring your puzzles?
No, but I could if you're going to do that.
I have.
All right, well, I'll go get them while you get started.
All right. We have donations of 3 prizes. So the first one to answer my trivia questions. It's a national park jigsaw puzzle. First question. National parks preserve usually natural wonders. What was the first national park that was designated to preserve a man-made attraction? No, that's the Little Missouri that you're talking about, Teddy Roosevelt National Park.
Mount Rushmore.
Mount Rushmore. Thank you for playing.
That's what she meant to say.
Oh, no, that's in South Dakota. No, that's a national memorial or monument. We're looking for a national park that's a man-made. Come on, you just asked me about it.
Golden Gate Bridge.
Mesa Verdi, the cliff dwellings at Mesa Verdi.
Oh, it's man-made.
And I had to say the first because now we have a second one. All right, we'll switch the question. Do you know what the second national park is? Preserving a man-made structure? This is a little tough because it's brand new. Gateway Arch National Park in St. Louis has gotten upgraded from a national. It's a monument. It's a man-made piece of metal. It's a monument. It's now been elevated. You can see I don't care for this change in distinction. It's on the plateau with Yosemite Valley. It's a chunk of metal. Come on. It's a nice one. All right, we'll go to the next one. Which national park has the most mapped climbing routes? Like 8,000 different climbing routes in one national park. Good guess, but not correct. Yellowstone, nope. Joshua Tree. If you go to Joshua Tree, and I'm only asking, I think we've already covered these. I don't know if you've been here for all of them. This is encouraging you to come to all of the shows. You'll learn all these fun facts to know and tell. All right, this national park was set aside to preserve a rare ecosystem. The boundaries haven't changed, but the system has shrunk. It's only 20% of what it originally started at. which ones, and, we just covered Glacier and how the glaciers are shifting. That's not the right answer.
So far, nobody's. won plus.
I know. that-
Everglades,
We're gonna,
Everglades.
the Everglades. You get a puzzle. I think I may have a fourth one. No, I'll get a different set of questions for next presentation. That's my son Brooks. We just started an adventure tour. A lot of people asked after the presentations, how do we get you to come with me on my trip and stuff? We've actually started a Best Views Adventures to lead tours to national parks. We've got one slot left. If you want to go to Moab, Utah in August, we can take 6 clients in about 12 hours. 5 of the 6 spots were filled. But there's have you been to Moab? Oh, all right. Well, then if I were to pick a lucky 6 numbers and didn't have to worry about money or anything, where I would move to would be Queenstown, New Zealand. Adrenaline capital of the universe. Moab is about as close to that as we come in the United States, in my opinion. If it's a mountain biking capital of the world on Slick Rock and stuff. I took my 3 boys out there a couple summers ago. We hired guides that were rappelling us down into slot canyons through waterfalls, and there's just so many off the charts kind of activities that you can do out there. It's the Wild West, in addition to the canyon lands and the arches and the parks and stuff. So this question was, why are you going to Moab?
You have a couple of comments in your chat.
Oh, I have one more. Teddy Roosevelt.
okay.
Oh, listen. Teddy Roosevelt thought that this national park was such an American icon, he considered it his civic duty to urge that every American visit this park. What would have prompted him to say that?
You love Yellowstone.
You don't get to guess anymore. You already have one. Well, Yellowstone was the first one, but that's not the right answer. What's big enough that he would have said, everybody's got to come here? I mention it because he was, what'd you say? Half right. Grand Canyon. It was, the guess was Grand Tetons. The answer is Grand Canyon. He stood on the edge of the canyon, and at the time, early 1900s, there were mineral interests that wanted to dig because there's a lot of minerals on display there. There were concessionaires that wanted to build hotels along the rim and commercialize the area and stuff. Teddy stood there and looked out, and he was just so awestruck by the sight. He said, there's no possible way man can improve on what nature has done here. Leave it alone. That was his. All right, thank you for playing. We'll get some more questions for next time. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
We have some chat questions.
I think you just had some comments that were nice. Fantastic, makes you want to go now. And thank you for a stimulating discussion and amazing photos.
All right.
So thank you very much, Steve.
Good.